We are moving right along over here in chapter 6, and we are discussing in the foundations of the Torah what it means to erase God's name. So there's a prohibition on it. But the Rambam doesn't start, like with most things, by pointing out the scriptural law. He starts out by saying, Kama Abed Shem min Hashemos HaKadoshim. So if you go ahead and ruin any of the holy names that belong to God, that are also some of his pure names, okay, you get lashes from Torah. So we say it's a prohibition. Okay, so how do we know that you get lashes? Because it says by Avodah Zarah, right? By idol worship, that says Vibadatem es Shemam min hamakom hahu lo sasun kein l'Hashem Elokeichem. That what you should do is destroy the mention of these idols, these false gods from this place. Do not do that to Hashem your God. So that's an interesting way in which this works. It's a little bit different than the way most other mitzvahs are learned. So I just want to kind of explain that a little bit over here. The reason why it's a little bit different is not really explained in significant detail by all of the Mefarshim, but the idea is that you have what's a general problem when you enumerate a law in the Torah that you're only allowed to give lashes when the prohibition is explicitly stated. So that's kind of the interesting thing, the way this works. No one really goes into it. It's just how this one happens to come out. Okay, so we don't say that there is an explicit mention not to erase it. It's just that it comes from the general rule of not destroying it by Avodah Zarah. And there's 7 names. The Rambam says is halacha, the second halacha over here. Okay, so there's 7 names. Name number 1, the one with the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. Okay, this one is called the Shem HaMeforash. Okay, the explicit name. Okay, sometimes it's also written as Aleph Daled Nun Yud. Okay, and just so you know, the notation for the vowel pronunciation underneath when it's the Aleph Daled name is the correct way of reading that. If you see that same notation under the name Yud K Vav K, that's actually not how you pronounce it. Some people would pronounce God's name as Yahweh or Jehovah. That is not correct. They were misled by, the idea was to remind you to say the other name of Adonus and not to pronounce the name based on the letters. There are other names here. There's also the name El, Aleph Lamed, Eloah. Okay, so it's a Sigol Katan at the beginning of it with a Mapik Hey at the end. Elohim, okay, is also you have to have that name written in there. Elohai, so Elohai is different, or Elohei actually over here. Let's see, it'll be both. I think that would be both. It would be Elohei and Elohai. Okay, so so if you pronounce it, he's only writing it Aleph Lamed Hey Yud. Well, if you pronounce it in either way, for example, like we say Elokei Abraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, right? Okay, but if it's Elohai is by itself, if it's used on its own, it'll have a patach underneath it, as opposed to when it's attached to another noun, like the God of Abraham, Elohei Avraham. They'll have a tsere, 2 dots underneath it. Then there's Shaddai, okay, and Tzivaos. These are considered the names of God, okay. Now, however they're pronounced, but they're spelled these ways. Everyone who erases even one letter of these things has violated Torah commandment and is liable for lashes. Third halacha. Okay, so there are certain words or letters that connect to God's name as well. So V'ha'alo kimin al yado, for example, by building a ma'aka and Parshat Mishpatim. So if there's a connecting letter like that, that is permitted to erase. Okay, so the Rambam obviously gives shiurim in so many different places. I mean, Moshe, lo kam Moshe, right? They say from Moses to Moses, no one was as good as Moses, and so the Ramah is of Moshe Israelis. So everybody's named Moshe. Actually, it makes it easy that so many of our greatest Gedolei Torah have the first name Moshe, because it basically means that it means that the Masorah was never really lost. Okay, so Lamed in Lado Shem and the Beis in Beilohin. Okay, all those are examples of that. Those letters are not considered as holy as the rest of the word. Okay, and everything that it sort of attaches to the name at the end of it, like Chaf Sofis, right? The Chaf that's written at the end, the Chaf is this one, but it kind of looks like this when it's at the end, like Elohecha, okay, and Chem, like Elokei Chem, okay, and those type of things. Those are considered part of God's name and cannot be erased because the name itself sanctifies them, because they kind of like get wrapped into the name. So even though we say that they've become sanctified and you can't erase them, they're not considered like erasing God's name, and you don't get lashes. However, you do get what's called makas martis. You get rabbinic level lashes for violating it. Okay. 4. So this is interesting. This is an interesting chapter because now this one's just talking about the honor and dignity due to God's name. So if you write Aleph and Lamed from Elohim, or you write the Yud Nehei from the full 4-letter name, you cannot erase them. Okay, because we already know you're starting with a name of God, and it doesn't matter whether you meant the Yud Hey as if it's one word on its own, or because you were trying to write the part of another name. Okay, because this name stands on its own and is considered an explicit name of God. Okay, so however, if you write the Shin and the Dalet from Shaddai and the Tzadi and Beis from Sevaos, those can be erased because they're not considered of the same level. So, and this is actually these laws are actually more interesting when you get into, this is me meta speaking on top of the halacha over here. This is actually more interesting when you get into fixing Sifrei Torah, because there are some names that start with Yud and Hey, like Yehuda. So the question is what did you have? The question in those cases is, what did you have in mind, and can you go back and fix it? Okay. Halacha 5. All the other appellations of the name or descriptive terms, which are meant to be appellations of praise to God's name, the Holy One, blessed be He, like Rachum, V'chanun, Gadol, Gibor, Nora, Neman, Kaneh, right, Chazak, all those words. So those words all mean that He's gracious, mighty, and merciful, and awesome, faithful, jealous, and powerful. Right? Kel Kana is an example of God's extracting judgment as a result of being jealous, right? But it's really a zealousness in acting in honor due His name, and dignity due it. So these are considered like other holy words and other holy texts that are written. They're called Kisvei Kodesh, and you may make erasures on them. Halacha 6. All right, a utensil where God's name was written on it. You cut out the place where the name was written, and you bury it, even if the name was carved into the utensil itself. Okay, like carved into metal, or it was carved into glass, and you melt it. That is that is part of the prohibition, and you suffer lashes for violating that. So you have to cut that space out and bury it. Okay, and so too, if the name was written on your body, you can't go and wash that spot, and you can't even rub oil on it, and you can't even stand in a place that is gross, just because you're going to violate prohibition. So don't do that. I didn't find this case so crazy because I remember I was somewhere many years ago 25 years ago at least, maybe 27 years ago, some dude had God's name tattooed on his arm. The Yud gave up, okay? He said he did it in honor of his grandmother. Okay, he wasn't Jewish. So I didn't want to get into the whole thing. I just happened to notice it on him. Just do a double take. So yeah, so it can be done. So it sucks to be that guy. If you ever converted to Judaism, you'd have a real tough time. If it should be that you have an obligation to do a immersion in a mikvah, then you need to wrap some rubber over it and immerse yourself. And if you can't find some rubber wrap, then you need to wrap some fabric around it. But you can't make it tight either, because you're also not allowed to interpose between your skin and the water. Because they were only saying to cover it so that way it's not impermissible to stand before God's name when you are unclothed. So that's another problem. So you can't even take a shower without covering it up. But this is interesting because you can take a dunk in the mikvah as long as it is covered, but it's not tightly. Now, he also says it here, that's it with the names. Here's something else that's interesting that you also can't do. One is not allowed to go ahead, and this is in Halacha 7 now, one is not allowed to remove or destroy even one stone from the Mizbeach, okay? And it has to be what's called derech hashchasa. You can't destroy one stone from it, okay? Or even from the Heichal. The Heichal is the central temple building. Or even from what's called the Azara, which is the entire temple courtyard. For those things make you culpable to lashes. Why? Because again, we learned from Avodah Zarah, right? Because you should destroy their altars. However, we learn that you shall not do this to God. So again, interesting halacha. It's like it's what's called klalu pratu klal, right? We had a general rule to do all these things of Avodah Zarah, and then we were referred to do all these things. Right? We make the individual prohibitions, and then we wrap it all back together to include it in a prohibition against doing it to God. So too, if you burn holy wood, okay, wood that was meant for the purpose of being used on the altar, okay, and you burn it for a purpose that is meant to just destroy it, you are in violation and you suffer lashes. Why? Because you're supposed to burn down the unholy trees, the trees planted to Asherah. Okay, they're special trees planted to the goddess Asherah. Destroy that. Do not do it to God. Now let's go another level down. So we say over here in Halacha 8 that the holy writings, them and all their explanations and their commentaries may not be burned and may not be destroyed intentionally. And one who destroys them intentionally suffers rabbinic lashes. When are those lashes meted out? So when you are burning and destroying Kisvei Kodesh, holy books that were written by a Jewish person in full holiness, meaning that they are totally cognizant of God and His greatness. Of al apikoros, Yisrael, okay, but a Jew who is classified as an apikoros, and he writes a Sefer Torah, you may take that Sefer Torah and burn it and its mentions of God's name. Why? Well, the Rambam says, why? Because they don't believe in the holiness of the name, and they didn't write it for the purpose of writing it for God. It's just, I'm just going to write a book. Okay? And therefore, since he was thinking about not having it being not meant for a lofty holy purpose, it is therefore considered something to be destroyed. It's considered it would actually be a michshol to keep it around, but it's a mitzvah to destroy it. Excuse me. And you don't want to leave God's name hanging around with the apikorasim, and not for what they do and anything else to do. However, a non-Jew that writes God's name, we actually bury that. And so too, all holy books, all Kisvei Kodesh that have worn out or that were written by a non-Jew are buried. Okay, so only apikoros gets burned, but a non-Jew who writes it, we don't keep it around. We bury it so people don't think it's acceptable to use it. Halacha 9, all the names that are written by Abraham are holy. Okay, so for example, who's going to mention a whole bunch. We've talked about these names. Okay, he says by Avram says, okay, Adonai imna matzasi chen beinecha, right? Al tov me'avdecha. So this is in the beginning of Vayera. So he says, please, my Lord, don't leave from in front of me. So if you notice over there, he's pointing this out because Rashi points out is that he might be talking, and Ibn Ezra point out, he might be talking to the angels, okay? And so that Rambam is saying, don't think that, okay? It's like, don't leave, wait a second. All the names that are written by Lot are considered profane, meaning they don't have the holiness of God's name, except for this one, which is El Na Adona Adonai Hine Na Matzasi Matzah Avdecha Chen. Okay, so he's like, let me go to Tzoar, because he meets R, right? So that's the end of the pasuk. And so otherwise, the other names, he is talking, Lot is actually talking to the angels. Let's see. Another case, in the case of Givas Binyamin or Kodesh. So in those cases, they use the shame Alf Dalet a lot. In that case, it's the case of the concubine that was killed while visiting Giv'ah in Binyamin. And those, so we see those names are all holy. All the names written by Micha, the story of Micha, are all chol. Okay, he's talking to another person, the guy who wants to hire him to be the high priest in his fake temple. Though all the names written by Navos are holy. Okay, and then he also says all the time Shlomo is said in Shir HaShirim, they actually are holy. And they're considered like all other kinuyim, all other appellations of God's name. Okay, so there's a lot of times that's written there, such as Ha'alef L'cha Shlomo, the Rama mentions. All of the angels mentioned in the book of Daniel are considered chol. They're considered regular names, except for Ant Malka Melech Malchaya. Right, you are the king on Most High, and this is like a kinui. So therefore, you have to be careful with it, not to erase it, and to be going as it. And that is the end of sort of taking care of God's name. It's not a very deep chapter. It's really more of a chapter that should be appended to the laws of writing Sefer Torah and Sefer Kodesh. But we have it here because it is a foundational belief that you must be careful with God's name. So we unfortunately don't see certain things in there dealt with about what do you do now when you have a lot of things printed and so on. So I gave a shiur on this many years ago. If you want to look it up, you can look it up online, and I'll try to attach it to this shiur if you want to look it up. It's on, I think it's on yutorah.org. It's about writing a get on computer, and I talk a lot about. No, I'm sorry. It's is that the one? Yes, it's writing a get on computer, and in that shiur I talk a lot about printing using printers, modern printers, and using silk screening. Which had since shiur was given 20 years ago, we were just talking about silk screening Sefer Torah. It was a very interesting time. And one of the things that I point out over there is that a lot of those methods of writing are considered writing. And my interaction with Rabbi J. David Bleich at the time, and so he had just finished writing an article covering some of the information coming out about the silk screen Sefer Torah, which in the U.S. we weren't really privy to a lot of the discussion, because at the time Rav Abadi had a presence in Lakewood, and Lakewood was a small town at the time, wasn't a big deal, and also had a kollel in Israel, so it really lit up Israel, and was kind of a quiet thing here. But the idea was that you could take a silk screen and just rub the Sefer Torah over it. So that was not the problem with that, is that's not considered writing. So in that case, it would only be a rabbinic prohibition to erase such the name of God. So it wasn't that problematic. What the poskim did come out with to permit, which I was able to locate at the time, was they asked Rav Yosef Shalom Aliyashiv, Allah Shalom, and Rav Yashiv in turn consulted with Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zichron Livracha, and they said that you could do something where there is a stencil laid over the cloth, and you actually pass your hand through each letter to write the letter out. What they felt was inappropriate was to kind of sort of bar none, just passing it over it. But if you actually pass through it to scribe down each letter, that would work. Which also means to me that if you just kind of like did little dab letters, it's also not writing. So these are interesting things to think about with what type of things are problematic and not problematic when coming to writing letters, because the same thing is with a printer. It just goes if you have an inkjet, or if it's a laser printer, it's just poof, it just puts the whole image right on the page and then just shoots it out at you. Laser printing is so cool because it just kind of like lays out the whole form and just kind of lays it all there all at one shot. It's such a cool device, but would not be considered writing. So all the people put all this stuff in Geniza. They don't really need to go in Geniza, because all these printed pages and so on, because they don't meet the criteria for writing. So it's a very interesting. It's an interesting shir, which I'm only giving you the Rosh Prakim over here. I'm only giving you like the introductory issues to it here. But if you look up writing a get on computer, you can either go, if you don't want to try to look for it in their search, just go on Google, and I'll try to post it on here later. I don't like to add it ahead of time because it gets funky adding stuff immediately on it. But I'll see if I can add it later in post production on this year. Talking about what's considered writing in these cases. Interesting follow-up here. Thank you for joining. Please stay tuned about the next time this class will be meeting, because we do have Pesach coming up on right after this. So I will see if we can squeeze this in at another time. We are almost done with Yesodei HaTorah, so we'll have to start figuring out what we want to learn next. Thank you very much for attending, and we will see you next time.